Hello, hello. Can you hear us, Anthony? It's
I
really great.
can. Nice to see everyone. Sorry that I couldn't be there in person.
No problem, no problem. It's really, really great and a great pleasure to have you with us. I'm sure a lot of people know you from the podcast, from the different initiatives that you're undertaking. And I'm always impressed by people who push the builders even further than they would go otherwise. And you've been a great supporter of builders and so forth. So today I think it will be a great conversation, and I'm super curious to hear a bit your thoughts on some of the lessons and some of the insights that you've discovered working with builders throughout the world.
Absolutely. I mean, look, builders in general, at the end of the day, an entrepreneur is just a problem solver. And I think that sometimes that gets lost. It's very easy to get excited about making money or about trends or about impressions and clicks online. But at the end of the day, whether you are building a local small business to serve food to those in your community, or you're trying to build the next Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc., you are just solving a problem. And so what we have seen over and over again is the people who can keep that in mind, who can identify very painful problems and then go out and solve them, usually can create pretty interesting products and companies.
Sure. I'm very, very curious if you'd summarize some of the most useful lessons that you've learned throughout the time to maybe 3, 5 points. What would be the lessons that you would say every builder should come back toward, whatever he's doing, however fast things are working or not working? What are those principles that maybe guide you on looking for these builders as they build the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. A couple that immediately jump to mind. First, make sure that you're working on a problem that you deeply care about. There is something that comes from having the enthusiasm and the energy every single day to jump out of bed and want to go and tackle it. And so you really have to believe in the thing that you're doing. Some people care about, the next calendar app or care about the next developer tool. Other people, that's really boring to them, and they would not spend years and years and years working on it. Eventually, they'd become disinterested, and ultimately the quality of the work and the final outcome would suffer. And so making sure that you pick something that you think aligns with who you are as a person, how you want the world to look in the future, and something that you think is a mission that you can be energetic about for a ton of years, 10, 15, 20 years, is really important. The second thing is to very quickly understand that no one is coming to save you. And what I mean by that is people who raise capital, who have advisors, who even have people who work on their teams. As the entrepreneur, you really have to have this mindset of self-reliance. You have to go out and understand that if something needs to get done, at the end of the day, you are responsible. That's what leadership is all about. When things go right, you're responsible for that. When things go wrong, you're responsible for that. And so that idea of self-reliance is really important because people who especially raise capital, I think they expect investors to kind of wave a magic wand and help make them successful. And as any entrepreneur who's in the crowd will tell you that's raised capital, most investors are actually not helpful. Right? You even send out, your weekly, your monthly, or quarterly updates, and they don't even respond to them. And so no one is coming to save you. Your company is going to be successful either because you helped make it successful or you didn't. And once you kind of understand that, you'll start to act on that. The third thing is the quality of the people that you include in your team is ultimately what's going to drive the outcome. There's example after example throughout history of the great companies which started out doing one thing and ended up doing something completely different. But the common thread is always the best companies have the best talent. And so focusing fanatically on making sure that you have the best people is a really important thing. And then lastly, I would say is the world is changing. And as that world changes, there's two different strategies. You can either try to build companies and make bets on things that won't change. If you think kind of a Warren Buffett, that's really his strategy, is he doesn't want to invest in the newest cutting edge technology. He wants to invest in the things that he thinks are not going to change over the coming decades. At the same time, there's a lot of people probably in this room and across the tech industry, they are betting on the change. And so understanding what is the strategy that I'm employing either as a builder or as an investor, and then making sure that the decisions that you're making are aligning with that. All those things I think kind of feed into structurally understanding where is opportunity, how do I want to participate in that opportunity, and then what am I going to have to do once I start to act.
Those are some absolutely fascinating points, and we could talk for days on each of them. I'm very curious, as you look through the builders and startups that come your way, what are some of the frameworks or insights that you're looking and judging when you want to invest and bet on a founder?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who I think have all kinds of crazy frameworks, and frankly, they're smarter than me. When you read about some framework that someone has for investing on a blog post or whatever, I immediately just put them in the category of those people are way too smart for me. The two things that I look for are the team and traction. And really, team, I think that we entered a period in the tech industry where there were so many people critiquing tech that it became uncool to care. It became uncool to work hard. It became uncool to be ambitious. It became uncool to try to actually change the world. And it was almost because we had over-rotated so much on that, and as the critics showed up, they were able to kind of take hold of the narrative and attack and say, how are you so arrogant to believe you can change the world? I actually think it's the exact opposite. Yes, we should be arrogant enough to change the world, right? And the reason is because we have examples throughout history that show technologists and entrepreneurs are the ones who change the world. I say over and over again that founders and builders are the single most important people in the world because they're actually the ones who act. Every single thing around you was built by an entrepreneur, right? And so people will always say, no, that's not true. The government had a huge hand. The government will fund a lot of things. The private sector will fund a lot of things, but ultimately an entrepreneur is who builds this stuff. And so the chair that everyone is sitting in right now, an entrepreneur provided it. The building that you're in, the entrepreneur provided it. The technology we're using to live stream right now, an entrepreneur provided it. The food that you ate today, an entrepreneur provided it. Every single thing in your life, an entrepreneur created. And so understanding that entrepreneurs and builders are the single most important people in the world, and that we should be arrogant enough to believe that we can change the world, because you have to believe it if you actually want to do it, I think is a really, really important piece. And so when I talk to teams, there's a lot of folks who I think are saying the things they think people should say, and what you find are those people are ill-equipped to go and be successful in today's world. If you go and you talk to a founder who is so arrogantly believing in themselves and their team that they can go and fundamentally change something, they have a higher probability of being able to do that. And so you can tease that out pretty quickly. The second thing is traction. I always say, just take it to the extreme. What is the single best pitch that you could ever do for an investor? You just screenshot your metrics. No words, no deck, no memo, no anything. If you have an amazing company that's working, you should be able to just screenshot your dashboard and send it to an investor, and they immediately call you and say, I want to invest. That's the best pitch possible. And so what ends up happening is the worse that your metrics are, the more that you need the deck, the more that you need the memo, the more that you need the sales pitch. And so really, if you kind of focus on what is the thing that ultimately is going to convince investors to want to invest in what I'm doing, it is proof that it is working, right? That is the most best argument, if you will. And so I think that if you take these teams that are really high quality, that are ambitious, that will not kind of relent when it comes to critics or inertia or anything like that, and you combine it with something that is working, that is ultimately where we get these kind of fundamental step changes in society and the economy, and that's really where the best investors are trying to put their capital.
Again, it almost seems like you're preaching to the choir here, in the sense that we've been having these conversations around builders being the engines of the economy from all the different angles. We've in fact had some conversations with a few ministers of the country, builders from all the angles. We've had Google, Amazon, telecom, and so forth. And I think what's clear in this part of the world, in Europe, is that some things cannot be moved unless we move them with builders. And we're intentionally framing the conversation around the conference as a kind of renaissance of European ambition, a kind of rekindling of what once moved mountains within Europe, whether it's culture, scientific method, and other types of progress steps that we've taken. I'm curious how you see Europe, and if you see a kind of opportunity where Europe can really take the lead in some steps that have not been taken maybe, or that have played too much on regulation and bureaucracy and so forth. And if you have some thoughts on how Europe might start this engine and push things forward.
Yeah, look, as many people I probably know, my wife is from Bulgaria. I've spent a bunch of time in Eastern Europe, and generally believe that anyone with an internet connection anywhere in the world now has the opportunity to compete on the global stage, right? And so whether you are in Europe, whether you're in Asia, whether you're in the United States, it's all a level playing field. And the reason why that's so important is that I think most builders and entrepreneurs, that's all they ask for. Give me an opportunity. I'll take it from here. And so literally with an internet connection now, you can do anything regardless of where the geography is that you are. Now, Europe specifically has a number of strengths that I think that the United States, Asia, South America, Africa, et cetera, does not have. And so leaning into the strengths could be something that could really set, I think, Europe apart. And so when you look at tech talent, is massive. How many companies in the United States are trying to outsource their tech talent to teams across Europe, right? So obviously Europe has a technology skill set that many other jurisdictions would like to have or to tap into. The second thing is cost of living tends to be a little bit lower, and so therefore you can actually do more with the same amount of capital. A third thing is that Europe has been around very long time. There's tons of entrepreneurs who have tons of history. There's very large families that have been doing this for a long time. And so being able to tap into knowledge and connections and things like that. And then lastly is that Europe fundamentally understands Europe's problems better than anyone else. And so what you're able to do is you're able to build solutions for the problems that you understand. And so when teams in America or elsewhere say, hey, we're going to go to Europe, a European team of high-quality entrepreneurs and builders should have the advantage, right? They understand that problem much better. And so I think that in a global world where everyone is doom scrolling on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, it's very easy to get caught up in kind of the global competition. Oh, I want to do what the people in the United States or in Asia or South America, et cetera, are doing. I tend to tell people, look, what you should do is you should focus on what is the problem and go solve that problem. And what you find is that people in the United States are better suited to solve problems in the United States. People in Europe are better suited to solve problems in Europe. Now, there are global problems, right? And you can get very, very large user bases. But if you look and you study what some of the best companies in the tech industry have ever done, they basically find a wedge into the market. Don't try to go solve a problem for 8 billion people. Try to solve a problem for 1 million people. And then once you get those 1 million people and you've built a solution that they really like, then try to find the next 1 million people. And you'll eventually get to 8 billion people if you are successful. But by building for some sort of wedge into the market, what you do is you kind of box the problem. You box the opportunity. And so it's easier to win inside that box than it is to win on the global stage. And I always think about this as kind of levels to a game. You have to win level 1 before you get to level 2. You have to win level 2 before you get to level 3. And so rather than try to go big right out of the gate, a lot of times it's actually better to start small. And so for a European entrepreneur or builder, it could be as simple as, what country are you in? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Go win that market where there's less competition, begin to build momentum, and then earn the right to go and win in other European countries, and then eventually try to go to the global stage.
I think we could, for every answer you had, we could have ended the conversation because there's a lot of not only value in the answers, but also an energy that you can really feel. We can feel you almost like being here. So it's really awesome to have you. I'm curious about one thing. We've had a lot of conversations about builders and what builders can really do to push things forward. Now there's an entire discussion on a global level about the way you would solve different things in a society, in an economy, and so forth. And it seems like there are two schools of thought. One is very much relying on a zero-sum mindset game, where you just want to redistribute stuff, take stuff from some people and give it to some other people, stop consuming, stop doing this, stop doing that, and so forth. And then there's another school of thought which understands that economic growth is the one thing that really improves the world. And much of what we have as economic growth comes from new technologies that we can push forward and so forth. And in one way, the one way we could really improve things is by accelerating growth, by really finding these levers. I'm curious if you were to suggest some things, like 2-3 ways by which the Romanian government might look to accelerate the economic growth that's happening in the country. What would those be?
Remove every single blocker for an entrepreneur to be successful, period. Just literally empower entrepreneurs and then get out of the way. And you know, one of the things that I use as a mental model is that entrepreneurs tend to be people who create things. Politicians tend to be people who redistribute things, right? And again, it is the incentive system in which they are put into is how their outcome or their actions end up playing out. Now, every single government has 1, 2, hopefully a handful of politicians that understand the role of the government is not to solve the problems. The role of the government is to create incentives so that the entrepreneurs can come in and solve the problems. And the reason why that becomes so important in certain countries is because when you have entrepreneurs who are courageous enough to go do this, right? And again, I use those words very carefully. The fact that someone wants to create something from scratch that has never been done before is an insane idea, right? You are going to spend your time, your money, and your energy. You are going to trade off your personal health, your mental health, all these things in order to go try to accomplish this goal. And so when somebody is willing to make that sacrifice, it is one of the most patriotic things that they can do for a country, is they want to improve their country and the lives of their citizens. And so as a government, if you want people to contribute to the country, if you want people to contribute to that patriotic kind of endeavor, then what you have to do is you have to help them. But helping them is not competing against them. It is not slowing them down. It is not putting friction in the way. It's actually the opposite. And so what we have seen across the world is that when governments make a conscious decision and they say, we are going to empower entrepreneurs, we are going to use the ideals of democratic governments, we're going to use capitalistic incentives, and we are going to let these people who are courageous enough to try to build a better world, and we're going to simply empower them and get out of the way, that is where you start to get true innovation. That is where you start to get true economic development. And so I always come back to this idea that what the internet did was it exposed everyone to the ideas of what was happening globally. But the best governments realize that they are in a global competition. And so in a global competition, the people that are actually on the playing field are not the politicians. The politicians are not competing against each other. It's the entrepreneurs who are competing against each other. And so I almost look at the politicians as they are the people who are in the training room. They're the people who are providing the water on the sidelines. They even may be sometimes the people who are trying to come up with a strategy for the game, but they're not actually on the field. And so what their job is to do is to make sure that the entrepreneurs have the resources, that they've got as much access as possible, that they've got the connections that they need. But the more that the politicians can empower these entrepreneurs and get out of the way, that is where the true economic development happens, and that is what gives countries the ability to compete on that global stage. And what we are entering into, I believe, is the hyper-competitive world where digital and also physical worlds are now being thrust into disruption. And so if you look at, COVID-19 as a great example, how many countries are saying to themselves, wait a minute, we pushed our manufacturing, we pushed our supply chains, we pushed all our logistics stuff outside of our country, we need to bring that stuff back. Well, if every single country is saying we need to do all kinds of reshoring and manufacturing and things within our borders, guess what happens? There's a competition for resources. There's a competition for talent. And so ultimately being able to say to an entrepreneur, hey, we as a country are behind you. We're going to give you everything you need to go and win this global competition. It also reinforces the courage and the ambition of an entrepreneur to say, hey, my country is behind me when I go and I do this. And I think that's really where you get a special situation. And so politicians who understand that, I think they will be the leaders of kind of the next century.
I very much agree with that, and I also believe that in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, you have a tremendous potential with very skilled and brilliant people with backgrounds in mathematics, engineering, sciences, and so forth, and a lot of low-hanging fruits. It's almost like wherever you look, there's an opportunity to improve something, to build something, to really move things forward. And it's almost like right now, there is no real competition between the countries because countries have been focusing mostly on the wrong things, have slowed down, and then you have some Eastern European countries which have started the engine, which have understood that this is the way that they can accelerate growth. Now, maybe jumping for one moment to Web3 and blockchain and all this space that is still in the very early stages, but is making some very significant progress. We've repeatedly said one thing, namely that the next Amazon or Google is very likely, probably just one smart contract away. And I'm very curious how you think Web3 and blockchain adoption could be taken to the next level, could be really accelerated and in a way where it doesn't take 10 years to reach that point, but in 1 year we feel we've made the progress of a decade.
Yeah, I mean, really it just comes down to like, what do people build with the technology, right? So forget the technology for a second. Technology ultimately doesn't matter to the end user. And so if I was to ask everyone here, you know, what technology stack is Google built on? Most people don't know. All they know is that I type a question into a box and it gives me an answer and it's amazing, right? If I ask you what the technology stack of Amazon is, like, I don't know. I press a button on my phone and stuff shows up at my door a day later. Like, amazing, right? And so same thing with a number of these products. But it goes back to this idea of if you're an entrepreneur and you want to build something that ends up being highly valuable, build something that people want, right? How do we get adoption? People need to build something that people want. And so we have seen with something like ChatGPT to go from 0 to 100 million users very, very quickly. Well, it's obvious that people wanted this thing. They were very interested in it. And so really what we're looking for is how can people take all these different technologies that technologists are very aware of now, use them in some form or combination, and then end up with a product that people are literally clamoring over. If you do that, adoption will explode. And to your point, that can happen overnight. It can happen in a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And so really, I think part of what, as a community, people have to look around the room and say is, hey, we've got 1 or 2 products that have a ton of global adoption, but there's not a lot of them actually. This is really cool technology, but what that means is that there's tons of opportunity still left on the table, right? If you go and you look at, I don't know, starting a hedge fund on Wall Street today, there's actually not that much opportunity, right? There's been so many smart people for so long who've been working on this, and they've arbitraged away a lot of that alpha. And so really what's happened is you start to get this commoditized industry. That is not what we're sitting here today with, right? We have a couple of products that have reached kind of critical mass and have gotten global adoption, but there is still a ton of opportunity, right? That we haven't had enough time. We haven't had enough smart people working on it yet. And so one that should invigorate people, that should, encourage them to go and try to build it. But if you want global adoption, then build something that people want to adopt, right? It is kind of the thought process. And so I think that's where we're headed, is that every single day it seems like people are coming up with better innovations, they're coming up with better products, and you can see kind of on launch, more and more users are signing up for these things. But what we haven't seen really since the creation of Bitcoin is how are we going to get the thing that explodes and breaks through the noise? And so there's a ton of teams that I think I'm really excited about and believe that they have an opportunity to do this, but also just because you have some early success, you can't lose focus. And I think that's the key piece is if you want 1 billion people to use your product, build something that 1 billion people want to use. And when you continue to focus on just what is it that a builder's job is to do, it's build something that people want. If you can solve that kind of equation, then adoption takes care of itself.
No, I come back to this idea of what I think most companies, most blockchains, most teams lose focus on, which is if you're fighting with your competitor, you always lose focus of what problem you're trying to really solve. And whenever you're focusing on building a solution for 1 billion users, at that point you understand how much the world might change, how much everyone might win if you have this one solution. So it's been extraordinary to have you with us and hear some of these thoughts. If there's one thing that builders should take home with them, what's that thought that they should take?
The world will try to convince you not to be ambitious. They'll tell you that it's crazy, it's unreasonable. Tell them they're wrong, and then go prove that they're wrong by building things that people want. And the folks who have the courage to do that ultimately are the ones who end up changing the world and improving the lives of billions of people. And so everything in your life is going to try to convince you not to do this. But if you really believe in it, you will act and you will build something that people want.
Anthony Pompliano. Thank you. Thank you, Pomp. Great having you, and looking forward to having you in Romania, hopefully very soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys soon in person.
Take care. Thank you.